I'm so excited about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I'm hopeful that when you're my age, that you can worry about other things. You don't have to worry about a national debt. You can have a healthy nation, a wealthy nation, the strongest nation in the world without worrying about that debt that my generation grew, and that you can move this nation forward the way that our founders designed it and have it be the most superlative government that was ever conceived by mankind.
The content presented on this podcast does not in any way represent investment advice. The information is provided for educational and entertainment purposes. Crypto assets are considered risky investments. You should always do your own research before investing. The opinions expressed here do not represent those of CoinDesk's editorial staff.
Senator Cynthia Lummis, welcome to CoinDesk Spotlight.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you again.
Of course, wonderful to have you here, and really happy to have you on this show because this show is all about understanding some of the key figures who are pushing this space forward. And so I have to start here. You've been called the Bitcoin senator in the past, and I want to hear about some of your inspirations. Who did you learn about crypto from? Who do you continue to be inspired by?
Well, I first learned about it from my now son-in-law, and he described this asset. I had to listen to him describe it several times before I finally decided to buy. And I bought just sort of as an experiment because when you have skin in the game, you start to learn about something. And so I bought 3 Bitcoin in that 2013, 2014 timeframe. But I really didn't take a deep dive in it until I was invited to the Satoshi Roundtable in 2017. I wasn't invited to speak as an expert on Bitcoin, thank goodness, which I was not. I was invited to speak on how Congress works. But I sat at that meeting for a couple days and just listened to the discussions from people who were owners of Bitcoin, miners of Bitcoin, investors, people who were involved in the Bitcoin algorithms. And I began to get really curious. There was a young man there who at the time was working for Kraken named Austin Alexander, who kind of took me under his wing and was explaining to me why different comments were being made depending on whether they were coming from a miner who might want more access to Bitcoin versus an investor who wanted to take advantage of the scarcity. And I became fascinated. And from then on, I guess I was orange pill.
Now, some years later, your trajectory kind of really has embodied this industry. You've really become a champion in government for those who are building in this industry. Who do you continue to get advice to? I guess, who do you look up to? I know you said you learned about it from your now son-in-law. You've since engaged with many folks in this industry. Who who do you continue to kind of talk about the key challenges in this industry with?
Well, I have 2 wonderful staffers who are very knowledgeable, Chris Land and Connor Brown. So we kick around ideas a lot about digital assets. We can do it sort of privately here in the office and share ideas without worrying that, the senator raised something really stupid. So it's nice to have staffers with whom you can have that kind of a knowledgeable working relationship. Michael Saylor, of course, has provided some tremendously accurate modeling about digital assets, and some of the presentations he's made lately have even expanded the way I look at Bitcoin moving into the future. And there are other people who, over time, taught me about Bitcoin and its potential other uses in a way that I can relate and then share it with other people my age. For example, Jack Mallers, I heard give a speech that led me to believe he was someone I wanted to sit down with. He's been generous every time I wanted to sit down with him and learn from him. And it has turned out to be something where your generation has educated me as a baby boomer to whom these issues do not come naturally. And there's some great books, especially on Bitcoin. I, would point to books by Jimmy Song and some other Bitcoiners that have just helped me sort of expand or learn to talk about Bitcoin in a way that's relatable to someone my age. And of course, since most of the senators are my age, I have to learn from you all, people your age, about how to communicate, in a way that people my age can appreciate and glom onto.
I want to talk about how you communicate what's going on in this industry in just a second. But our last Spotlight episode featured Michael Saylor, and he really kind of unpacked his plan towards this $200 trillion Bitcoin network. You mentioned him as one of the people you speak to about what's going on in this industry. You listen to what he has to say. Do you think that Bitcoin can be a $200 trillion network?
I do. When you look at the fact that it is fully decentralized, that it is immutable, that it is scarce, that as more of it is mined, the volatility is going to decline. Its use cases will expand. All of these events surrounding as it matures as an asset are going to make it more useful. It is faster. It is cheaper. The Lightning Network that now can lay on top of it makes it more useful as a means of exchange. Its continued growth as a store of value is going to be, I think, its strongest future use. When you look at the US dollar, that because of inflation is declining in value every year much more quickly than we'd like to see. Its use case as a, a, a store of value is not good. Its use case as a means of exchange is very strong, always will be. But if I was going to save, I'd want to save in Bitcoin, not in US dollars. So I think we're seeing more and more people realize that it because it's immutable, because it's easy to store and retain either in an individual wallet or through a custodian. It's easy to buy now because of the exchange traded funds that have been created by very blue chip companies that people are used to using for all kinds of investments. It's become more available and user friendly for people who are more used to traditional assets. And I think all these things, when you add them together, have expanded the use case for Bitcoin.
You bring up the US dollar there, and I think that some people, maybe who are not as embedded in the crypto space, listen to you, um, listen to your policies, and might question if your crypto advocacy is driven by concerns around the US dollar's global standing. Do you have concerns about the US dollar?
Well, like my concerns about the US dollar are this: we're $36 trillion in debt. When I first arrived in Congress in 2009, we had just turned from 9 trillion to 10 trillion. You look at the way we printed the US dollar during COVID. During a 22-month period, we printed more US dollars than had ever been printed before in the history of our country. It happened in 22 months. So what we've done is created more and more dollars, but not add to the value of the economy behind it. And by doing that, we're debasing the value of the US dollar. Now, I think there are ways out of it. but it's going to require some discipline that we're now beginning to see due to President Trump's efforts in Doge to ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse. We're seeing members of Congress finally starting to talk about being on a reasonable path to matching revenues with expenditures instead of blindly continuing to spend more than we take in every year. And the strategic Bitcoin reserve as a way to, over 20 years with a buy and hold strategy, cut our debt in half. All of these are ideas that have finally come to the fore and are going to give us a path forward that we just were unwilling to see prior to this year.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the first time we heard about the strategic Bitcoin reserve was from you at the Bitcoin conference last year. You really laid out this plan for the US to start acquiring Bitcoin to address this massive debt that you just so nicely laid out for us. Is Bitcoin the solution to solving the debt crisis in America? Is this kind of the solution? I don't want to say Hail Mary, but the Hail Mary to start to chip away at a debt that has seemingly gotten out of control?
Yeah, I think it is. Uh, the Bitcoin Act is the bill that I've been looking for all my life. And I've been in government for a very long time, looking for ways to reduce our debt so we're not spending so much money on interest. We can spend it on things that make America healthier, wealthier, bring manufacturing back to the U.S., have as clean an environment as we can possibly have. All the things we want to have a healthy, strong, vibrant country. When we're spending money just to maintain interest payments on our national debt, we're choking or limiting our own ability as a country to spend money on things that make us healthier, wealthier, and in fact wiser. So I think the fact that a tool's been identified that if you buy 200,000 Bitcoin a year for 5 years for a total of 1 million Bitcoin, which is 5% of the world supply. Hold on to it for 20 years. And with some of the best modeling available, it shows that it would cut our national debt in half. That's a game changer. So if you were to couple that with a Congress that's more committed to getting to the point where we match our revenues and our expenditures, we can retire this debt. It's the only vehicle I have ever found that will achieve that, and we can do it in a neutral way. By that I mean we don't have to spend new taxpayer dollars to buy Bitcoin. We can take our gold certificates, which are currently held on the US's books at their 1974 value, which is about $42 an ounce, convert them to current value of gold, which is, hit a new high around 3,000, and then use that to buy Bitcoin, hold it, and we don't even have to use new dollars to convert currently held assets that are undervalued into Bitcoin. And then if you hold them for 20 years, you look at the trajectory of growth in Bitcoin, which will begin to decline over the time, but has still been modeled to account for that. We'll be able to cut our debt in half in 20 years.
I want to talk a little bit about the strategic reserve. I mentioned we heard about the strategic reserve for the first time, I believe, in summer last year. Since then, President Trump has brought it up several times. We now have a strategic reserve that holds some of the Bitcoin that's been confiscated by the United States. But my question here for you is, on March 2nd, we heard from President Trump, and he said on Truth Social that XRP, Solana, and Cardano would be included in this strategic crypto reserve. Then on March 7th, a few days later, he announced that the reserve would only include Bitcoin. I'm curious if you are able to give us any insight into what changed between that Sunday and Friday. How did we go from a basket of cryptos to back to the original plan, which you presented, which was Bitcoin?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I too watched that happen from afar because I had pneumonia that week. And so I wasn't even around to comment. And I didn't comment, but I know people who did, who felt that it was best to take the most immutable, the most decentralized, the most scarce asset and treat it differently than some of the assets that don't have those same assets of digital gold that Bitcoin has. And I think that those were conveyed to the White House in a way that caused them to think maybe we should, as far as a strategic reserve goes, limit it to Bitcoin. It was subsequently brought out that some of these other digital assets might be included in a stockpile, but not in the strategic reserve. I think that's the right conclusion. And so, however they got to it, I think they came to the right conclusion.
I want to talk a little bit more about making the country healthier and wealthier. You mentioned that just a few moments ago. You've been around for a long time advocating for this industry, and for a long time, founders didn't want to set up shop in the United States. They didn't know what was going to happen next when it came to policy and regulation. That really has changed in just a few months. I mean, I've seen some of those same people who said they're not going to set up shop in the United States taking photos in DC, engaging with regulators, engaging with policymakers. Um, I have to say, CoinDesk's consensus is even going to be in Toronto this year because when we were planning it, there were many folks who didn't want to come to the conference in the United States. So my question for you now, Senator Lummis, is the U.S. open for business? And what kind of assurances can you um, tell us here today for those founders who previously weren't sure about the country?
Well, I can see why they were concerned. The regulatory framework was not clear. The SEC, that wanted a lot of control over this, had a regulatory framework that was not clear. They chose to use enforcement actions against companies that caused them to incur tens of millions of dollars in legal fees and months on end tied up in court before they could get resolution, if they could get resolution at all. The United States was a regulatory mess and a landmine for companies that were trying to establish and understand and comply with clear rules of the road. That has all changed. You're seeing SEC commissioners that are trying to wind down some of these enforcement actions in ways that resolve them so the bleeding of legal fees by both the SEC and the people that they are bringing enforcement actions against can come to a conclusion. You're seeing the Congress finally willing to move legislation. The bill that we moved out of the Senate Banking Committee recently on stablecoins, that's the first bill to come out of the Senate Banking Committee in 8 years. 8 years. This place was locked up. It was frozen. It was calcified. It was so rusty it couldn't function. And now that's changing. So you've got the SEC waking up. You've got the Congress waking up. You've got executive orders coming out of the White House. You have the president who has declared that he wants to see the United States become the digital asset capital of the world. He wants Bitcoin mining to occur here. He created a digital asset crypto team in the White House. Every approach that President Trump has taken to this asset class has been a step forward. And it's given everybody momentum, ideas, and a desire to move forward with regulatory clarity so we can fulfill the goal of making the United States the digital asset capital of the world.
You mentioned President Trump really championing the space, and I have to ask you um, as we get closer to more clear regulatory frameworks in the U.S. I have to ask you about Trump launching his own meme coin. We know before the inauguration, it rose above $70. I believe it's back down to around $10 now. There are folks who are still getting educated in this space. There are folks that are still kind of learning about this industry. Do you have any sympathy for investors who may have invested in President Trump's um, crypto, or is this just uh, part of doing business in meme coins before we get clear regulation?
Well, for my 2 cents worth, um, I think meme coins such as that should be marketed as entertainment and not as an investment. I do believe that Melania Trump's meme was marketed as entertainment and not as an investment. I think that's really appropriate. And so that's sort of the way I categorize it in my mind. I do think that it's going to be important as we move forward to make clear what is an investment grade digital asset and what is not, and try to create some of those definitions with more clarity. It used to be that um, crypto sort of meant any digital asset, whether it was Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano or Solana or whatever, that somehow they were all the same. And now we're starting to see some differentiation among digital assets based on the differences in the qualities they have. Are they fully decentralized? Are they scarce? Do they have the same ability to um, avoid being counterfeited? Those differentiations are starting to occur, and people are starting to get more clarity about the differences. It's kind of like we used to all call any kind of tissue Kleenex. The terms were used interchangeably. It's kind of that has been that way between Bitcoin and other digital assets. Now people are saying there's a difference, and we need to start putting digital assets in a basket that makes sense based on the qualities of that asset. And that's finally happening now. And I think that's going to help us as we move into creating a statutory regulatory framework.
It's interesting you say, some assets should be labeled as for entertainment. I've had many guests join me on programs here on CoinDesk that say meme coins to them are synonymous with gambling, and it sounds like that goes a little bit with what you're saying. There are different asset classes here, and the ones that we really need to focus on and regulate are the ones that bring value to the folks that are using it. Am I summarizing you correctly?
You are. Um, Commodities have certain traits, um, and have a regulatory body, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, through which they can be regulated. Securities have different qualities. And certainly the SEC really is um, a blue ribbon agency when it comes to disclosure and consumer disclosure and information and protection. So commodities don't need that same kind of uh, disclosure because it's more self-evident what a commodity is, whether it's Bitcoin or cattle or sheep or pigs, they're all commodities. We're finally getting to the point where those distinctions are becoming more clear.
Senator, I'm so happy you brought up cattle because I had to ask you, how much of your job do you feel like is just herding folks and getting them all on the same page, much in the same way you would herd cattle? You and I have talked about your cows in the past. Talk to me about the similarities there.
Well, it's certainly true that there's a lot of it's easier to herd cattle than cats. It's easier to herd cats than congressmen. And so there is a lot of it. But I'll tell you what we're trying to do. And so far, so good. We're trying to keep this bipartisan and we're trying to keep it bicameral. We don't want to see sort of a competition of ideas develop that is based on some sort of a partisan notion or House versus Senate. And so we remain in close contact with the bipartisan groups that we've been working with for the last 4 years when the Democrats were in control of the Senate. Same group of people are still working on these issues. And we have developed a sense of sort of trust and camaraderie during the last 4 years that we're able to continue with now that we're moving forward with a different majority party in the Senate. And certainly in the House, we're also trying to uh, keep people informed about the scope, direction, timing, and ideas we're moving forward, so we don't come crashing against each other without having discussed some of the different approaches that we're proposing. And I hope it remains that way because I think that will bode well for success this year in moving forward, not only with stable coins, but with market structure.
Do you think we'll get a market structure bill before August?
I do.
You
That's our
do.
that's our goal. I know it's an ambitious goal, and particularly so in the Senate because commodities fall under the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committee, securities fall under the jurisdiction of the Banking Committee. So it will require both committees working together, as well as I mentioned, working with our House counterparts on this. So our goal is to leave for the August recess, having passed market structure. Yeah, that's a very ambitious goal, but uh, I've been diddling around with this for 4 years. This is year 5. I'm ready to move. So we're all systems go.
You just brought up the bipartisanship that's really needed to get a lot of what we're talking about across the line. And at least from the outside, it feels like that bipartisanship has been a little bit fractured in the last few months. Can you speak to that a little bit? And can you talk to me a little bit about you're gonna need Democratic votes, right? Like, yeah, are those relationships still there when we're talking about this industry in particular?
Yes. And the answer is those relationships are still there. So even though Congress as a whole looks uh, challenging in terms of bipartisan interactions, I think that the digital asset bipartisanship, at least so far, has stayed intact and seems unaffected by some of the things that are swirling around us. I hope we can keep it that way. That's my goal.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into your goals. We were previously talking about, how the tides have really shifted just in the last few months under this new administration. You mentioned the SEC and what some of the SEC commissioners like Hester Peirce are doing for the industry now. I was reading an opinion piece this morning by Renato Moriarty. He sometimes co-hosts a show on CoinDesk with me about the SEC roundtable that happened last week. And to summarize, he was saying, he would have loved to see more. There was a lot of talking about what has previously happened and not enough talking about moving forward and getting clear rules uh, written in ink on paper. How do we do that? How do you think about letting that go, letting go of what's happened in the past and moving forward getting things actually done, like we've been talking about?
Well, I watched that SEC roundtable on television while I was home last week, as if I didn't have anything better to do. But I came across it and I couldn't resist. And I too found it to be a very academic discussion as opposed to a practical discussion. I was viewing it as a policymaker, whereas I think a lot of the panelists were viewing it from a regulator perspective. And so I kind of went away with it thinking that most of what I heard might have been more helpful to a Hester purse than to me. But still a lot of attention on the Howey test, which is the approach that we've taken from a statutory framework. And so I think that's a good match, a good pairing of where to draw the line between a commodity and a security. And fortunately, there's another working relationship that I think is very strong. I feel like I can pick up the phone and call members of the SEC. I actually felt that way before and did frequently. And so that ability, I think, also will continue to serve us well as well, because we've already established those threads, where the group of people that are trying to find their way um, out of regulatory and statutory darkness in this area and shed some light on this are very earnest about it, very sincere about their interest in this, not from a partisan basis, but just from a policy basis. And so one of the things that brought Senator Gillibrand and I together is both of us come from states with a very strong state banking system. The dual banking system that Wyoming and New York have, um, uh, from a state perspective, is very strong and has great experience in the digital asset space, which is somewhat unique for states. And it made it possible for Senator Gillibrand and I to move forward with confidence that within a dual banking system structure, our states could handle this. And so we've wanted, during the course of all of our work together on this, to preserve the dual banking system and to create space for both state regulators and federal regulators.
All right, we have 2 minutes left, and there are two last questions I want to ask you before I let you go, Senator. As you know, as someone who has been at the Satoshi Roundtable, who's engaged with folks in the space, the narrative around crypto for a long time was very anti-government. I think that is changing in some circles now. Government officials like yourself are now championing it. What do you think people get wrong about the relationship between digital assets and the government?
Well, I still think of Bitcoin as freedom money. I can relate to the fact that, in particular, Bitcoiners are very reluctant to see government um, encroach in this space because uh, Bitcoin doesn't need government. It is fully decentralized. It can function completely outside of government, and many people would like to keep it that way. Um, I see it as uh, a store of value that can help government solve problems and at the same time can be used to help preserve the US dollar as the world reserve currency. And I think it's very important that the US dollar continue to be strong uh, in ways that preserves its status as our world reserve currency. So because uh, uh, because I've spent so much time in government, I don't trust government, but I can see how government can use this fully diversified asset, this completely decentralized asset, in a way that can benefit government, but does not have to constrain or regulate Bitcoin in a way that interferes with people's individual wallets, individual custody, their use of this asset as a faster, cheaper means of exchange, and a superior store of value. So I see them as able to sit side by side without having to encroach on the superior qualities of Bitcoin. And I hope that Bitcoiners can see it that way, as long as we're protecting their privacy, their ability to hold their Bitcoin individually without government interference. We saw government interfere when it came to a choke point 2.0. We saw the Canadian government interfere with people's bank accounts during COVID, during the truckers' strike. We want to make sure that that can never occur between the U.S. government and Bitcoin. And that's another goal of mine as we move forward with this unique, fabulous new asset.
Senator Lummis, you are always welcome back to continue this conversation with me. I know we have limited time, so the last thing I'm going to ask you before I let you go is, so much of what happens in this space is about legacy, and so many people are creating legacies now. When you think about your legacy, when you think about how your great grandkids are going to look at your work in crypto, what do you hope they're thinking? What do you hope they're saying that you did for the space?
I hope my grandchildren will say, my grandmother helped eliminate the national debt. That's it. That's it. I think the debt is such a burden that I'm placing my generation, the baby boomers, are putting on your generation and my grandchildren, then I'm embarrassed by it. And if I can help put in place a mechanism to help retire that debt so my daughter and my grandsons are not constrained by it, I'll feel that all these years that I've spent in the wilderness in government have not been for naught, but they've been for good. And that's why I'm so excited about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Uh, I'm hopeful that when you're my age, that you can worry about other things. You don't have to worry about a national debt. You can have a healthy nation, a wealthy nation, the strongest nation in the world without worrying about that debt that my generation grew, and that you can move this nation forward the way that our founders designed it and have it be the most superlative government that was ever conceived by mankind.
Senator, thank you so much for joining me on CoinDesk Spotlight today.
It was my pleasure. It's nice to be with you again.